Oh, we got, you saw that slide. Might.
You can get all the Starbucks all over.
No, I stick.
Call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks for all you coming tonight. Please take the roll.
All council members are present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 3 is the approval of the agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Call the roll. Sorry.
Avery,
Aye.
Duran. Aye. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Rasmussen.
Aye.
Stecker.
Aye.
Childenberg. Aye. Wendell.
Aye.
All right. Item 4, is there any member of the public who wishes to address the council on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5. Presentation of Stormwater Master Plan. John Thompson, our Public Works Director, will present this item.
So good evening, Mayor, members of council. John Thompson, your Public Works Director. Tonight we're going to present council with an update to the Stormwater Master Plan. Staff and our consultant, our contractor consultant, ISG, has been working on this for the last 2 years. We're getting down to the finalized steps of it. So this will just be an update to council. After this, we'll come back to council later this year, or I'm sorry, early next year, for acceptance of this plan. So we're looking for your feedback tonight and making sure we're on the right page and the right path. So I'm going to introduce Stephanie Fleckenstein, who is the Senior Water Resources Engineer with ISG, and she's going to go through the presentation.
I told him he could call me whatever he wanted, but with the right title. Good evening, my name is Stephanie Fleckenstein. Glad to discuss this with you tonight. So one of the things that I really enjoy about a master plan of this kind is we are able to dial into some of the really fine details as well as look at the full system and be able to have that view and lens of everything on the same plane as well as some of the fine-tuned details. So that's what some of what we'll share with you tonight. But the purpose of this plan, if you think about in a natural environment during a storm event, the way a creek or a river will swell and retract following that storm event, I want you to keep that in mind as we go through some of these images to think about how our built environment and how the rest of the city responds to that simultaneous event over the entire city. So the plan goals, the first and foremost is to reduce flooding and its impacts. Secondly is to enhance water quality, recreation, and aesthetics. That graph that you'll see there on the right-hand side, that is the annual precipitation trend in Brookings over the last 100 years, and it does denote a 25% increase in the last 100 years. What's really neat for me as we've gone through this analysis through our master plan is being able to simulate some of those changes in storms and intensity, and we'll share with you, most of our graphics are based off of a major storm, and I'll hit on that a bit going forward. So the last plan was completed in 2008. There is improved data and improved technology that we have leveraged through this analysis. We will share with you the evaluation of existing conditions, so the way things look right now of what we know about the system and the surfaces that exist to date. The plan does recommend a prioritized list of projects as well as the process to be able to revisit that as changes are made. This is intended to be an adaptive plan with that prioritization process. We also provided revisions to the structure for the stormwater fees as well as for future developments, recommendations for those standards, as well as new inspection procedures for existing infrastructure. I'd like to note that this plan does not address riverine flooding within 6 Mile Creek. Our analysis has been rainfall on the city and where it goes from there. So impacts of any of the creeks or rivers moving outward into the urban area is not what we have evaluated. It is to the city and where it goes from there. Right, moving into existing conditions. What you'll see here are the boundaries of what was evaluated in this plan. As you'll see, as I shared, that 6 Mile Creek was, and the impacts were not included in this study. But with these 5 drainage areas you'll see here, the arrows are denoting the flow path and the direction of that runoff and where the storm makes its way towards some of those receiving water bodies. I'm going to take a moment to introduce a little bit of the symbolism on this page. So to begin, this is the SDSU drainage area. What we have modeled and what you'll see here for results are for a 100-year storm event, so a major storm. So this, in this case, it is 5.7 inches of precipitation in 24 hours. What that results in, you'll see there that light blue shading of where that ponding or flooding takes place within the drainage area. And then the bright green are the existing storm pipes or existing infrastructure that is able to convey some of that surface water through that pipe or through that channel downstream. I'm going to go through 2 more here. For the Madera drainage area, you'll see here similarly in that major event where that ponding and inundation takes place. And then finally, for the central drainage area, you can see as that moves towards the west of where that ponding is taking place. The other 2 drainage areas I showed in the first slide are not included as we are moving forward because there were not major concerns or there were not major improvements recommended in those areas as have been included for the 3 that I've shared with you here. So backing up, as we talked through the analysis that we've done, this is all a simulated event as we look at where does the water go? Where do we see it? What we do with that analysis from there, that's what I'm going to walk through next. So the information that we gathered through community engagement, through events, as well as committee meetings that had representatives from the city, from SDSU, from BMU officials, and community representatives. We also gathered feedback as well through an online survey, and we'll share some of those results later in the presentation as well. So I think this is a really important piece of the puzzle to share with you that it's important to us that what we use the model for or what we use those results for is reflective of the values of the community that it's intended to serve. So through our community engagement, that's what we were seeking and that's what we received. With our project prioritization, I'd like to share with you on the right-hand side of the screen, these are the current recommendation categories. So after we had our model, we were then able to evaluate and identify projects or alternatives that we would like to address. And we were able to take a single project and score it based on how well it addresses these categories. Based on the feedback from that community engagement, we then associated a weight with each of these categories to say which is most important to us. So at the top of that list, you'll see those that received the feedback to be the highest weighted or the most important, and those on the bottom to still be something we wanted to evaluate, but did not carry as much weight in the scoring process. To highlight this, let's consider 2 projects that are otherwise similar, but one of them provides an improvement for citizen safety, and one of them provides an improvement for reduced maintenance. While both of those are categories that we want to evaluate, we want the one that really protects citizen safety to be of a higher priority. So in that way, that's the way we have used the weights to be able to score the final importance of each of these categories differently. So with that process, as I was describing, we'll start with a project, and with those categories, we have a objective score assigned with that. From the feedback from the community with the weight, those are then multiplied. For those that have citizen safety, they will receive that higher score as proportion through that process. Once we have that list of projects and their final scores, we're able to then objectively look at those values and numbers and be able to rank them in priority of how well they address the suite of categories that we have defined through this process. This prioritization process is something that we intend to be used and revisited. And what we would like that to be is as we address some of the projects or as they are built out, or as priorities change through this cycle and revisiting of our capital improvements that have scored the highest in prioritization list, that we are adaptive to what we have fixed or what we have addressed, that we are able to use this same structure in turn to revisit how things fall out in the highest priority. Our strategy for project identification, our first objective here was to provide storage upstream or at the location of flooding. So as we're looking at some of those drainage areas, what we would like to do is to prevent the flooding before it becomes a larger problem. So the higher that we can get up in the watershed, the greatest opportunity we have for that interception. What does become tricky with that is sometimes the land use or just how mature a particular drainage area is. There may not be a footprint, there may not be space for us to allow for that storage, but that is our first goal. Can we get storage high in the watershed, upstream, or at the location of flooding? Next, from there, what we evaluate with our strategy is how do we increase conveyance in the area of flooding. So some of the tools that we use for conveyance are open channels or pipes or otherwise. How do we move water out of this flooded area? And third, to avoid moving these issues with our conveyance downstream, if we are able to create that connectivity to move that flooding downstream, let's also provide storage there where we have increased that conveyance so that we do not create an unintended problem with our increased conveyance. So the three strategies in order of the way that we've evaluated our drainage areas is to first begin with storage as high in the watershed as we can, use that conveyance to move water through the areas of inundation, and then as that receding portion, provide storage downstream in those areas where we have been able to connect and move that runoff downstream. So to highlight a bit of what this looks like in these areas, these projects that I'd like to go through are not listed in order of priority, but I do want to point out where they are located and how that relates to some of the guiding information that we received from the model. So similar to what you had seen previously of that blue shading, that is the existing storm, and you'll see that the locations of where we have identified projects to be able to address that are upstream. So we were able to address that and to provide some opportunities for improving our infrastructure and capturing some of that to alleviate the downstream flooding. Similarly, these are not listed in order of priority, but I would like to again highlight where they are located and our strategy as it was employed to be able to, as you can see, where that ponding takes place is further downstream within the watershed, and we are, through this strategy, trying to pull as much of that water and intercept it further higher up into the watershed. Again, these are not listed in the order of priority, but wanted to share with you and to be able to see where that exists. One of the things we also discussed is the way that we are sharing this with you right now is of the existing condition. So this is, you can see the problem areas of where the ponding is. We would like to in the future revisit this with you with the proposed projects to also be able to share what that improvement looks like. So to be able to use the same model, but in the future condition of after those improvements have addressed some of that existing ponding and issues in those spaces. All right, so as we described to this, we used the model to identify the problem areas. We used the feedback from the community to evaluate how do we want to grade the performance or the priority of these projects. From that, we were able to rank all of those projects. With that, we ended up with $45 million worth of projects identified in this plan. What we did with that priority was to be able to look at a 10-year time frame. So coming up next, which are the highest priority? With that, what we are attempting to do through this process is to make sure we have right-sized the program. So I'll talk a bit about fees and a bit about the financing for this, but I do want to just make note that those things do need to be in concert. That if it is the wish to be more aggressive and to address more projects in a rapid format, the financing and rate increase would also need to match that. So this is what we have outlined and projected for the next 10 years. It is $12 million worth of projects. The projects that are included in this 10-year timeline here range in cost from $380,000 to $4.7 million.
So here's a quick overview of two of the highest ranking projects. So the Village Square Conveyance and Storage Project, providing some storage between University and 8th Street so that we can increase conveyance in the Village Square area to reduce some of that flooding. At 20th Street and Maderi, providing some storage near the soccer fields so that we can increase conveyance upstream and prevent ponding on Maderi and on 20th Street.
Right. We'll move on to the stormwater fee as I promised. Here it comes. So what does the storm utility fee pay for? A variety of things. To begin with, for the maintenance of the infrastructure for pipes, inlets, drainage swales, and basin. It not only pays for the maintenance, but also the replacement of some of those that are in poor condition or aging, as well as new projects that are aimed to reduce flooding and improve water quality. The stormwater utility fee also pays for personnel and administration and the maintenance of that stormwater equipment. So I want to talk a bit about what this plan recommends going forward. So I'm going to talk about the equivalent residential unit. This is really based on a philosophy to pay for what you use. So this fee is based on impervious square footage. We collected this information with infrared technology that allows for that to be calculated as well as revisited as land use changes occur in the future. And we really do feel this is an equitable process to be able to equate that fee with the greater imperviousness. So what you are using is what you are paying for, as the rest of the city is responsible for the infrastructure that receives the runoff that comes off of those properties. That is the relationship that we're trying to make sure that we are matching with the structure for this fee. This is a best practice. 80% of communities in the US with a stormwater fee use an equivalent residential unit system as we're proposing here. So this is an image of the infrared flyover content that you'll see here. The pervious areas are shown in that green color and the impervious, are shown in the gray. So what this is highlighting is the gray spaces there are where we're going to generate runoff. That is where there are parcels that have more gray than green, and those are going to have a lot more runoff coming off of those properties. But this is a very direct way to be able to calculate those values and therefore have the runoff calculations based off of this information. So I want to highlight what that looks like as far as our previous rate structure, what that means. So I'm going to introduce you to two parcels here and talk about the way the fees have impacted them. On the left, we have a large parcel. It's 50 acres, and it is 25% impervious. So as you look at that, there's a lot of green space. We want to see how much water should be equivalent to how much gray we see there. On the right-hand side, it's a much smaller parcel, as you'll see, but it is nearly 95% impervious. So that comparison of how much green to gray and how much green to gray, you'll see between them. However, on the right-hand side, the current annual bill for that property is $23,604, whereas on the right-hand side of the screen, that bill is $6,723. And I'd like to point out that the total acreage that we have for impervious areas, so that gray space that you'll see there is 13 acres on the right and 12 acres, I said that backwards, 13 acres on the left, 12 acres on the right. So pretty equivalent in that, but the fee that you'll see representative of how much runoff, or rather what the city is then responsible for receiving from that and managing within their infrastructure, is very different. So within the city of Brookings, the way this ERU will be used, we were able to calculate with the average single-family residential, how much runoff are they generating? And we found the square footage for that based off of that flyover imagery that you were able to see there. So all single-family residential properties are going to pay that one ERU value. So those are all consistent. Where we do use this calculation to evaluate impacts or changes to fee are all the rest of the properties for non-single-family residential. So there's a variety of different land use types that would have that calculation apply. So what that means or what that looks like, I'd like to introduce you to this slide. On the right-hand side here, we have a variety of peer communities and the way that they have structured their stormwater fees. So within Brookings, effective proposed 2025, a monthly fee of $6.14 is the proposed ERU. As you can see how that fits with the rest of the peer communities, it is right about average. So certainly not the greatest and not the least either. We're proposing a 4.24% increase compared to the current rate that was last increased in 2019. And then as I was sharing with you that 10-year plan of those projects, you know, that was created in concert with a 3% annual rate increase within that time frame as well. So what that means for addressing our capital improvements or our projects of what's available to us to be able to address, this would generate an extra $300,000 annually to be able to fund those projects and capital improvements going forward. And as I said, that balance needs to be together. So if there is a desire to change one, it would certainly impact the other. With this, for the next 10 years, as I shared, there's $12 million of projects that are funded with this change, with the 4.24% increase this year, and then a 3% annual rate increase following. This is intended to be billed with property tax. All right, so I want to go back and revisit those two lots that we had looked at previously. So that cost comparison with our previous rate structure compared to currently, the proposed annual bill for the property on the left is now $9,351, and the property on the right is $8,670. And as you can see, the way that equates to the amount of water being received or the amount of infrastructure that we would need to serve these two properties is reflective of the amount of impervious area that they have. All right, moving on to water quality. This is a highlight from the online survey that we received. And the question that was posed is, how important is it to install practices such as green infrastructure, native habitat, and green corridors that enhance flood resiliency while also improving water quality, recreation, and quality of life? So with that, we asked for 1 being most important and 5 being least important. We asked the community, how do you feel about this? How important is it to you? 75% of respondents scored this a 1, 2, or a 3. So pretty clear evidence of this being a highly valued piece of feedback for us to incorporate throughout our plan of we do want to include green infrastructure that improves water quality, recreation, and quality of life. A few of the recommendations that we've included of how to do that, there's certainly throughout the projects that we've talked about within that prioritized list, components of that in public spaces, but there's also opportunity for this to be encouraged or increased on residential private property. So the recommendation is to establish a reimbursement program with an example being the city of Des Moines reimburses 50% of a property owner's cost with a cost limit on that of how big the investment could be. So up to $2,000, they'll pay 50% of that. We also recommend that to start, this is a focused program. I think that really allows for a lot of neighbor-to-neighbor conversation and that storytelling that really helps with a lot of this adoption, to be able to ask, hey, what's that? And I think that for some of these private properties, that is a really helpful tool. So keeping our scope focused with these two proposed style of projects, so rain barrels and native plantings, I think that that's helpful in this early stage of a program, certainly with the potential to expand that into the future with other opportunities for different styles of practices in those private spaces. I'd like to share next 2 development standards and then the inspection procedures that are also included in the plan. The first, so as we think about new development or new infrastructure going into the ground, one of the things that we want to address is and include is our opportunity for improved operation and maintenance that maintains the longevity and vitality of the infrastructure over time, as well as what that impact for water quality would mean if we include a requirement for this forebay. So as you'll see in the image on the left there, this is intended to be the first receiving space for runoff as it gets there. It allows for some of that pollutant to settle out before moving on further downstream. Having this isolated space allows for improved operation and maintenance to keep dredging or otherwise activities of clearing out some of those pollutants or sediments that are compiled in that area to a smaller geographic space for ease of machinery or shovel or however large the forebay may be. This is a really important interception point to allow for that water quality improvement to take place in that space. The second standard I'd like to talk about is the groundwater freeboard. So in these detention areas that you'll see, the first image on the top there is a dry basin, and then as well as what that looks like when there is a storm event or when that infills. So throughout this area of the state, there's a lot of impact of where the groundwater table is, and generally it's high. So with that in mind, it is important to us that there is some freeboard between the bottom of the built infrastructure and where we expect the groundwater to exist below grade. And that freeboard between those two heights allows us to keep our full storage capacity as designed within the detention pond, or rather, if we did not have that freeboard, in times of high groundwater, we're losing capacity in our expected storage within that facility. Additionally, that separation allows for that space within the detention pond to function as planned without that mixing or interaction between those two bodies of water. Inspection procedures are also really helpful as we look at a simulated representation of the way our system should perform. I bring that up because our model is ideal, and our infrastructure in the field is not always in the same condition as we expect it to be. So inspection procedures really allow for us to have either corrective maintenance or to ensure that potential issues such as clogging or ragging or otherwise things that would limit the capacity within our infrastructure, that we address it in a timely manner and that we have a direct process to identify where are those high risk or critical infrastructure opportunities, and we need to get there frequently and address any concerns that we might have to the condition of that. So within this inspection procedure, there is a new form. There is a recommended inspection frequency, and it is geographically based as well to be able to tie together the technology that we have to keep this a focused and executable recommendation within the plan to make sure that our infrastructure as it exists is performing at its best capability. All right, here's our summary. This plan is a guiding document for future stormwater improvements as well as those development standards that we just talked about. This improves resiliency against flood risk. It provides recommendations to accelerate practices that improve water quality, including some on residential private property. And it improves the sustainability and protection for our watersheds. Additionally, outside of the rest of the way that water is behaving, we have also included some recommendations of how to finance this program to make sure that these recommendations for projects that we have do have some layered in support of how we get that done. So the balance of the financing with the ERU, we have improved the equity and that calculation of the way that we are collecting that fee, and we have projected that out for how we plan for the next 10 years and the funding that we need to be able to address those highest priority projects. The next steps to come are to compile our final report, present that report to the public and to the City Council in the coming year, or rather after the new year, and as well as have that ERU fee ordinance have the first and second readings anticipated by the end of the first quarter of the coming year. I would love to answer any questions that you have. This has been a joy to work with. There have been a lot of contributors and collaborators throughout this process, and I feel very proud of the work that has been done to have a final plan recommended for the city.
Any questions, comments? Councilmember Wendell.
Thank you, Mayor. had just a couple of questions. On slide 30, Stephanie, you highlighted a reimbursement program in Des Moines. That was a residential program. Are there examples of reimbursement programs in other cities that are larger scale for industrial or commercial types of properties?
Sure, yes, yes, there are.
I don't know of anything similar. Some communities do incentives for, like, those kind of properties could reduce their impervious area to reduce their fee. So incentives on the stormwater fee is, some communities go that route. I don't know of any similar programs for commercial and industrial.
It's tougher on the commercial side because of the payback. So because you can, if you have a big strip mall or something like that you own, you need those parking spots for your strip mall. And you could probably take some of those out if it's already been developed, but to take that out and refresh it over to grass or to permeable pavers, it's quite expensive versus what you're really paying on the stormwater fee. So the return on investments is gonna be tough on the property owners like that, but we can definitely look at that going forward.
Sure.
And to see whether or not, and just kind of keep our eye out, what type of trends are out there for the industrial side.
And maybe it makes best sense to start at the residential level. That feels more manageable.
Yep.
When we think about impact over time, it feels like commercial and industrial properties
Yep.
could provide greater impact. The other question I had was related to the introduction of, new or larger detention ponds and additional storage. It makes me think of some of the challenges we've had in maintaining existing detention ponds, in particular those that are close to residential areas. How do you recommend communities think about the potential staffing impact on an introduction, or the introduction of a plan like this? I mean, I think the financial projection around the cost of the infrastructure is one component of this, but I think about the potential need for additional staff support in maintaining the detention ponds and even the inspection process. Is there an approach that you've seen cities take as they think into the future about the impact on their staff? Even staff size and amount of time?
Well, the slide that Stephanie showed, that showed the forebay, that will provide the opportunity for these detention basins to be more readily cleaned and maintained. It isolates the suspended solids in areas like this that would be more manageable to maintain. You would be able to get in there with a piece of equipment. If you have, at this point, we don't have those pre-treatment opportunities. This would kind of focus those pre-treatment opportunities right here. So that's moving forward with the developmental standards, right? As far as increasing the size of detention basins, that we're not really necessarily going that route. What we were, and the next slide I think shows it a little better, is that we're trying to establish a separation between the bottom of the detention pond and groundwater. I think there's been some unrealistic expectations of detention basins in the past where there's standing water in these ponds. And it creates a hazard. And we all are familiar with hazards with detention basins. This would help prevent that from occurring. There is a time and place for water to be in detention basins. We can establish wetlands that may be able to provide water quality, but those need to be designed. And unfortunately, those were not, the way the design standards are right now, they're not designed. So we need to go forward, we need to forward think and see what we want to get out of these detention basins.
I think you could add to that too, that the ERU, the new calculation of the ERU, when you're adding the overall cost of the project, you also added the overall cost of the operations. So the increased operations is calculated into that offset of the ERU. But Charlie's exactly right. The expectations of what that maintenance looks like is going to be different, especially as we look at maybe some of the different plantings that could help offset some of the cleanliness of the water. So looking at the quality is my assumption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have, as part of that cash flow, we have included additional funds for maintaining our infrastructure.
Thank you.
Councilmember Spector, you were next. I only have 2 of my 3 questions left. And they're not, I don't know how directly they are for this, but one of them is in the maps that you had up front. They had, there's some, it's obvious that roads are blocking some of that drainage. And that's also true with the new FEMA maps. You know, that certain roads have stopped land from being a flood zone where north of or whatever, you know, around, on the other side of the road, it's now a flood zone. Is there any recommendation on what could be done to help get the water out of that area that's being blocked by roadways? I mean, are you allowed to make actual culverts, like do the university one? That's a good example. Up, see, on the north side there, the bypass on 14 where all the water's backing up to the left.
Yep.
I mean, if it goes on the other side, you're not gonna have that much retention, or does it then, do you end up with conflicts with property owners on that side of the road, or, like, is there, and what's the issue with this? I guess.
So
Is there
those,
any solution to that?
there are solutions to that, and that's building additional infrastructure as to where it's inundating right now. I believe SDSU has a couple projects for this area up here that will help mitigate some of the inundation, the external inundation of verse where it's rolling over their retention ponds right now. It's expanding past those.
Okay, so it kind of brings into another question of future roads and designing them in a way that they're not blocking the flow of stormwater. And is that addressed at all?
That will be addressed in the development standards and the engineering standards that we have. As you build additional roads, you'll have to have that conveyance and that runoff to model how that road is gonna affect this area for flooding. So,
And that is being modeled now.
Yep.
Back before 2006, before we had our developmental standards, it wasn't well modeled. Now we require modeling, stormwater modeling for any runoff generated by a site. And with that, we know where the water's gonna go or where it was supposed to go, right? And so we know existing patterns and proposed patterns and able to better design our infrastructure to be able to convey that and to store that. Like up here, I think I don't know if anybody's been up to the bypass recently over by Mid-Airy. SDSU is expanding their detention basin, and then they're providing conveyance along the bypass to provide that water, a route to get to that detention basin better. What we're proposing too is with this project, is providing detention south of University Boulevard. And that would help alleviate some of that flooding.
Right,
So that is part of the master planning process.
okay. The other thing that I'm wondering about whether or not it's included in the master plan is the wellhead protection area, and whether that should be included in this because of the water quality aspect of the report, or this plan's not.
This was designed to more mitigate flooding issues around the community.
Okay,
We've expanded to water quality for specific developments as they develop. But we did not, it's not as concerning it's not, our focus is not on the water supply for the city.
okay,
and Bonnie on that, so BMU has the wellhead protection areas and it's zoned out, so any type of development going up there, this will be very critical as to what the runoff is within those wellhead protection zones to ensure that we still have quality water, groundwater for the community for hundreds of years to come. Hopefully.
Councilmember Tiltenberg?
I am curious, the plan outlines that we would see an increase in the rates in addition to changing the model of how we calculate those rates. I noticed that in the report here, it says the last time we increased those was 2019. How often do most communities evaluate their rates and implement increases? Is that an annual evaluation? Is it once every 5 years?
There's a chart there that shows our peer communities.
So on this peer communities, they, like Sioux Falls, annual increase of 4%. Cedar Falls, yes, 7%. Fargo is periodic. Mankato, couldn't figure it out. Ames, Iowa, no. So it looks, majority of them have something, mostly if they have a master plan. If they don't have a master plan, I could see them not having increases all the time, but once you have the master plan and you know what your funding is gonna be required, that's where that's coming into play. We're starting off with a 3%, but remember, this is a guiding document, same as the solid waste master plan. It's a guiding document. We'll revisit it every year and look at it, and make sure that what we're doing is appropriate. Because we also don't wanna have reserves of $20–30 million and we have nothing to do with them. So we did set a prudent reserve in here, just the same as what we did on the solid waste master plan. So that it covers operations, but it's not excessive for the community.
I would add that I agree, revisited, when there is a new master plan or when there are significant changes in the cost or expected projects that need to be funded. Ideally, there is not a dramatic change year to year, so trying to have that as smoothed out as possible is the ideal or recommended format to do so. So having that 10-year projection really helps keep that consistent and to not have dramatic changes for ratepayers.
I would imagine that, going back to Councilman Wendell's earlier comments about staffing, that if we are seeing that there is an increased need in staffing, we could calculate that in our budgeting and visit that as we calculate our.
Yeah, we've had Ellers, a financial firm, a large financial firm that deals a lot with the stormwater fees for many communities. And they've done a careful analysis. We've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb about where the money should be allotted for every year. And based on inflation, based on rate of return for investments. So it's very, very specific and detailed, but it does allow for these adjustments, and it's an easy model to adjust in the future.
Thank you.
Councilmember Avery.
Yeah, I was looking at the slide where we have projects. When I first looked at that, I was thinking that the $12 million worth of projects in the next 10 years, and reconciling that with the next sentence that said 10 years project construction cost range from $380,000 to 4.7. And then as you talked about that, I kind of figured that I understood that now, that these are individual projects in the second line and the total projects in the first line. So.
Correct.
Then the next thing there is the $45 million in projects identified in the plan. And we have 12 million, so we're, a lot of people some people are gonna look at that, so you're 33 million in the hole already. You're spending money you don't even have. So is that a good idea to show a huge deficit like that when we really probably aren't intending to do, we're not gonna do $45 million worth of projects?
Well, we have $45 million worth of projects. Back in 2008, when the plan was updated there, I think they had 31 million, and they were able to finish some of these. This is just a long-term plan. We have 45 million identified, and each year we're going to do what we can do on the financial. We're only going to look at it really at 10 years at a time, because even after year 5, you're kind of looking at that magic 8 ball. Have we really done everything right? It will change a little bit. But the identification of all the plans are really good to have, because it also helps to justify what the ERU is too. There is a need to increase the ERU because we have all these projects identified that'll increase the quality of life for the community. I think you and I talked about deficits before. It's how people perceive that. It's not really a deficit. We have a balanced budget on this. We're spending what we receive and just carrying a prudent reserve each year.
Yeah, I know we show that a lot of times on our priority projects, and we'll show that we're going to do this whole list of things, and then we have this much money, and somebody will do the math and say, well, you're $10 million short.
Yeah.
But.
Any other questions? Councilmember Estherson.
Could you talk a little bit about how you identified the projects, like before you run it through the prioritization and run it through the calculations? How do you know exactly what areas do you need
Well,
fixing?
I will let ISG do that, but it's coming back to, if I can find the slide again. Where is that first? Keep going down. I'm losing it now. Yeah, oh, right there. Whoop. So, but first is when they do the flyover and they really model where the inundation areas are. That's the way they can see the areas, and then Adrian or you guys wanna?
Yeah,
Comment
yeah,
on
so
that?
the strategy is really first looking at existing conditions, where is it flooding, and then following these steps. So providing storage where it's flooding, providing storage upstream of where it's flooding was our first goal. That was, possible in some areas, not possible in other areas where we couldn't do that. Getting water out of the areas where it's flooding more quickly. So there's projects that do that. And then providing storage downstream coupled with those conveyance projects. There are a couple projects carried over from the previous plan that help improve areas where storm sewers are in poor condition or just need to be increased in size.
I'd also like to add that the modeling tool that we have to make this commitment and invested in, as we have proposed projects, we can iterate through that. So we can see what is the impact of this, so we can really dial that in so that our recommended projects really do provide the greatest benefit for that area.
Yeah, so we modeled some projects that aren't in the plan because there wasn't enough benefit of those projects, so we didn't include them.
Councilmember Durham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, thank you so much for this presentation and the work you've done on it. We really appreciate it. To kind of add on to that question, in any of the projects or the neighborhood improvements, did you use some sort of equity lens or metrics to make sure that we were evenly serving the community in all the different neighborhoods? Or
Yeah.
can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Great question. I think one of the great benefits of having a defined prioritization process is there is a trail of how a project scored. So we are able to see the how and the why it is at the top of the list or wherever it may be. I think what's really helpful for that is you can see the full boundary of where we have modeled. So anything within that footprint has been evaluated on the same scale. As far as specific areas of interest, that was not represented in our prioritization process or in our categories. If that were to be something that we would like to be included, we could do that in the future, or maybe through a different iteration of what those categories should be. At this time, the greatest evaluation we've had of those projects side by side is with that same matrix and categories.
Sure, thank you. And then second question is, can you just remind me with the potential reimbursement programs, is the ideal timeline to also launch that in 2025 with the raise of rates if we adopted this plan, or would that come at a later
Ideally,
date?
yes, you're right. We'd love to launch it the same, yes. We just have to, we want it to be fully baked. So you have your customer outreach and education so that everyone understands what these programs are and get the excitement going for that. But ideally, yes, we'd love to start that off at the same time as this.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
I hope the public is going to watch this so that they understand what we're up against.
I would just only comment the next steps, right? Just to remind council and the public watching at home, next steps, staff will bring forward the final plan, which will be given to the council and the public. Similar presentation, then implementation of the ERU, which will be a further conversation, notifying those individuals of the change in the financing, implementing that, then moving and progressing forward to the program and implementation of it, which will be many years into the future.
Yeah. This is just the small amount of work in the beginning. Now after we get the plan put together and start implementing it, that's where all the work will come in from.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my God, it's Thanksgiving. We'll clap for you too.
All right, let's move on to item number 6. Interstate 29 corridor. Mike Struck, our Community Development Director, will present this item.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. This is more of a discussion item tonight, so feel free to interrupt, ask questions throughout this. I tried to limit the slides. I believe this kind of came from discussions that council maybe had with Paul, and kind of looking at what should that I-29 corridor look like as people are traveling up and down the interstate. What should they see? What do we want, the traveling public to see? So, just kind of starting off a little bit with the map. I think we'll just start kind of along the northern end of I-29. So if you can see the red line, that's the existing city limits. And as you kind of move from north to south, just wanted to show you real quickly what some of the different zoning districts are along here. Predominantly with your commercial and industrial districts, it's the I-1, the B3. There's a little bit of B4 on the west side of the interstate, and then you have I-1R, which is a restricted industrial district, planned development district, and that's the primary zoning along this corridor. Once you get kind of south of the railroad tracks, everything on the east side is outside city limits at this particular time. And you can kind of, I'll take the zoning layer off so you can kind of see the development potential as you move down the corridor. There's maybe some limitations, kind of where some of the areas have been mined. I know there's some wetlands in this area as well, so that area may not be developed in the future. There's one area up here too, the research park. As it stands right now, it is zoned A, but it's just kind of a holding spot. It's owned by the state / SDSU, so it's exempt from our zoning. If they were to sell some of those parcels to a private entity, then they would have to comply with their zoning ordinance, but at that particular time, there's other issues they'd have to work through because it's currently zoned ag, and I don't think anybody would want to build on an ag parcel because the setbacks are pretty significant, so they'd have to look at a different zoning district if they wanted to do that.
Mike, if we were to change the zoning, what do you suggest it become?
In this particular area, we do have a zoning district called the B5, which is a research and development district. I think we'd want to look at some amendments to that to really coincide a little bit with what the intent is there, to look at what some of the uses are. I think right now, they have certain architectural standards for their facilities out there. I'm not exactly sure what they have on the landscaping side of things.
I guess I'm on the research park board and I don't know the Lloyd Company building. It's a privately owned building, but it's still on state land, so it can still be zoned ag then?
They did not sell the land.
Right.
So they have a land lease.
Right, and so
So-
they're allowed to have
Yes.
it on ag land as a leased building?
Yes,
Okay.
because they still own the land. When they originally started, they didn't have the permission to sell the land, so they had to do a land, like a 99-year land lease. They have since been given the authority where they can sell up to a certain number of acres, and they just haven't to date yet that I'm aware of, so. A couple other things that I'm gonna turn the zoning map back on and point out to you. In this area up here, this is a city detention pond, so we would still have control of anything that we'd wanna do along that area, from a landscaping, planting type perspective. We also have the two large, the Weiss Business Park and the Marketplace. Those are both planned development districts, so as with the planned development district, they go through a design review process with the initial development plan, and it comes to the planning commission, city council. And then as long as the final development plan is consistent with the initial development plan, planning commission has final approval on the final development plan. So that's with the PDD district. We do have some commercial property that's undeveloped up here in the Wilbert Square addition. One small little PDD parcel here, and then as you continue to move south, the I-1R, which is the restricted districts, kind of on the west side between 6th Street and the railroad tracks, and there's a few parcels as well on the east side. In total, there's roughly about 203 undeveloped acres along the I-29 corridor. Of those, 87 are currently in some sort of a design review zoning district. Either it's the I-1R or a planned development district. We do have a few residential areas with the golf course, and then kind of where the new interchange is, would anticipate as development continues to express interest in that location, you might see some potential rezonings in the future. And then, you know, really on the east side of the interstate, I think there will be opportunities. It's just a matter of timing, and as they get further along with some of their current operations, and as they start to close those out, what do they look at as redevelopment opportunities or the use after their mining operations? The other thing I'm going to show is the commercial corridor overlay district. A little hard to see, but that is kind of the hatched lines, and that would apply on 20th Street South as well as 6th Street up in these areas. So that's something that's probably 2 years, maybe 2.5 years old. We've been seeing a number of projects come forward on the southern end of the community along 20th Street South. It's an additional design review overlay district, so we put that in place to implement some certain standards to try and align more with your priorities. Any questions on some of the zoning side of things? All right, I'll jump back to this. Oops. Here's just a couple of, I tried to provide these as a hyperlink, so if you wanted to kind of go through and see what some of the uses are. What's, I think the next slide, other than I don't know how to spell yard on the side yet, but my apologies. Give you an example of, like, if you were to just pick a B3 zoning district and somebody wanted to put in a grocer, supermarket or something, and it's a permitted use by right. So these are some of the basics, yard requirements that they would need to meet: their front, their side, their rear yard, and then there's maximum height. There's an asterisk that comes into play because buffer yards could be applicable if they're abutting a residential district boundary line. And then there's also a number of other things. So this applies, all of these standards, if they're applicable, we review on every use when they're submitting a site plan or for a building permit or something. We start evaluating their parking, their landscaping requirements, their signage, buffer yards if they're applicable, their access drives. We look at the intersection safety zones for access, as well as if it's close to a corner lot, street intersections. Lighting plans for illumination to try and make sure the light isn't spilling over onto adjacent properties, causing light pollution, garbage receptacle locations. We have certain requirements that they have to be in a side or rear yard so that they're not out and visible. And then there are some districts that we have a section which is called the adjustments to front yard regulations, where it's a minimum 20-foot setback along the I-29 corridor there. So, you know, one of the things we wanted to talk about is what is an overlay district if we wanted to create one along the I-29 corridor. And I'm not going to read it word for word, but it is kind of a regulatory tool that allows you to create a special use district. It's an overlay, so there'd still be a base underlying zoning district. So whatever it might be in that particular area, it could be a B3, B4, I1, but it'd be something that you specifically want to address along, in this particular case, the I-29 corridor. There's a number of different examples out there. I mean, you can see some of them are waterways, environmental areas, historic signs. We have one with design, with the commercial corridor. We actually have, I would say, 4 of them that exist in the city right now. We have the Brookings Regional Airport Overlay District, not very commonly utilized. We have a commercial corridor, then the I-1R Restricted District, and then the Planned Development District, because it essentially serves as that additional design review process. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at along the corridor, I guess I'd like to have a discussion on what are some of the things that you're interested in either preserving or seeing along there, or what are some of the things that you would like addressed. And that would give us some feedback on how we should or would move forward if that's the desire of the council.
I would just add to the conversation, and Mike's right, this, I think, originated from me and a council member who brought this up at a meeting for future discussion. And the idea stems from the commercial overlay district, right? The council approved it 2-3 years ago with the intention that once you get a block into Brookings, you see how beautiful this community is. And the idea of bringing buildings closer to the street, making it more walkable from a pedestrian perspective, rather than being just like every other community. With that in mind, we have thousands of people that drive on the interstate on a daily basis. And that is the front-facing port of our community, of your community. And knowing that we have businesses that have invested quite considerably into buildings within that corridor, how do you assure, with potentially an overlay district, that other businesses that are coming in aren't distracting from those businesses that invested, but just as importantly, putting their best foot forward, being the face of this community as people drive by. Once again, it's a billboard, if you will, to showcase how beautiful Brookings is by being more intentional. And just give you an example, you could have, for example, I know we have a representative from Daktronics here, right? Their beautiful building there that's a corporate office. Right beside it, if you didn't have proper zoning or overlay, could you potentially have more of a vehicular storage unit? And how would that detract from that building? Or more importantly, could you have more corporate offices or buildings being front-facing, or displays being more front-facing to truly display the beauty of this community as people go by our place there on I-29? And that's kind of where the idea originated from.
Any other comments, questions?
Are you aware, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you aware of any place that's done something?
It's, you can pretty much find them across the country. They all have different purposes that they're trying to serve. I've seen some, Sioux Falls, I believe on I-229 has a sign corridor overlay district. Grand Forks, Fargo, they have different types of overlays. They serve a specific purpose. So it really comes back to is really what your intent is, what are you trying to accomplish, what your kind of
Make it
primary.
look nicer.
The other thing I would say with that is it's not a retroactive overlay
Right.
district. Where you would see that is if somebody were to redevelop it, then it would apply. Undeveloped parcels it would apply, and then as they redevelop, but if nobody were to, just buy a building and they really don't change anything, it wouldn't retroactively apply, so.
Some of the comments that I get, people that come into Brookings from the south, is they notice the trail over on the east side. And so, knowing that they're maybe gonna be staying at a hotel on that side, they already know that they've got a trail to walk by. And it's aesthetically pleasing, I guess is the word I could say. And it's inviting, and I think that's kind of what I kind of envision is people want to come to a city that looks like it's inviting to begin with, and if you've got a walking trail right along there, it's right, it's like, come on in and take a walk. Or even the buildings too, I mean, I don't necessarily think that the gravel pits are very pleasing to look at, but they also try to hide it a little bit. I mean, Everest has got quite a few trees along their ponds. Their ponds have been there longer than everybody else's. But maybe, eventually try to beautify it by putting a line of trees in there along there, if it's something that nobody wants to look at. You know, and obviously, we would hope not to have a used truck salvage yard or something like that along the interstate. I know that's along the interstate and a few other places in our communities close by, not necessarily aesthetically pleasing. So I guess that's the way I'd look at this a little bit. I don't know how we, you know, I suppose with zoning and setting up our PDD, we're not necessarily gonna have a used truck lot, or something in that order. I know we've got some implements and stuff on one exit there. They're basically serve our community. They pretty much keep pretty decent, clean lots. I mean, I guess that's, the standards on there maybe could be considered too.
I did just pull up the I-1 district, that's our light industrial district, because that is also a pretty common zoning district on the east side of the interstate. Just looking quickly at the permitted uses, so I mean, these are all the different types of uses that would be allowed by right, provided that they can meet these standards, which are pretty much just your setbacks, front, side, and rear. That's your I-1. There isn't, you know, a significant amount of requirements there. The landscaping standards would apply that. What we incorporate now is foundation plantings along the sides of the building that face public streets. But it's, I guess, you know, really the question is if you want to move forward with an overlay, sounds like it's probably more of a landscaping type, quote unquote beautification type thing, where we could maybe look at certain tree plantings, green space, elimination of potentially like parking along the 29 corridor and outdoor storage, things like that. Might kind of.
Any other questions, comments? Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, so future discussion, does anybody on the council have something they want to bring up?
I just want to confirm real quick before we leave. Just from council, is there a desire for staff to continue to push this forward and bring back some things to consider? Because I'd hate to see Mike put in a lot of work if there's not a desire by council.
I would be interested in seeing some of those options as it relates to the aesthetic nature of that corridor.
Bonnie?
Yeah, I think it would be nice.
Okay. All right.
I'm not
That's
sure
kind of
where
pretty much a
on my
consensus then?
priority list.
That's enough, that's shaking the
Yeah,
head.
yeah, all right. Okay, so item 7, topics for future discussion. Anything that anybody wants to bring up?
Thanks, Mike.
Okay. All right, next meeting's 28th of November. We've got at least one second reading. We got a first reading on budget amendment number 10. We have contracts change order on 22nd Avenue Phase 2. Budget amendment number 9 is our second reading. And then action on municipal owned facility and on-sale liquor licenses. Think I got anything else here? Entertain a motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Happy to.